Right. So I am going to pose this first question to Diane and Alex. And Diane, we will go ahead and start with you. So we'll talk right at the beginning of the State of the Union address. Of course, at the forefront right now is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That has been something that we've been following very closely. President Biden announcing the closure of American airspace to Russian flights, the release of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So, what do you think about what the president had to say about that ongoing situation tonight?
Well, I think he had good points. He said good points, but I just wonder, like, why there wasn't an earlier reaction to the the steps that were taken, and that we didn't help them more. I personally feel like we should have stepped in earlier to stop it from starting to happen instead of waiting for it to happen. Like the sanctions should have been put before, and that's my personal feeling. I am proud of the Ukrainians for what they've done and how they're fighting back. But I just wish, every day I pray for them, and I just wish that we would have stepped forward sooner to stop anybody from being killed by the Russians. I guess that's my opinion.
Diane, thank you for your response. Alex, I'm going to turn things over to you now to answer the same question.
Yeah, thank you. Diane, I agree with you to a certain extent that I think Biden's response and his administration's response to the Russian incursions should have come earlier, before Russia even laid troops in Ukraine. But that being said, watching him give a speech this evening and starting the speech off very strong, the first topic he addressed, going in head on, I think the first sentence he brought up was about this Russia-Ukraine crisis. I thought it was an extremely strong response. And knowing that he and the rest of the West don't want to send troops into Ukraine because he doesn't want that direct military engagement with Russian forces, I think everything else that he has been leading the charge to do, except for putting American boots on the ground, is the strongest possible thing he could do, especially when he took the time in that speech to announce that he was going to ban, like you mentioned, Diane, all the Russian airspace flights from touching down in the United States, which I think, at least from the way he said it, might have been the first time that the administration announced it was taking that action. But I think the most impactful thing that the president said tonight with regards to this was actually when he was talking about NATO countries, which obviously Ukraine isn't a part of NATO. And I think that's part of the reason why Putin wanted to invade it. But when he said that we would defend every inch of NATO territory, and then he said again, and I mean every inch, I thought that was an extremely strong show of force from the president and the American government, period. Because if the predictions are true that Putin wants to go further and go into the Baltic states, for example, that will then mean direct military engagement with Russian forces and Western boots on the ground. And it seems like Biden is saying he knows that, and he is ready to make that action if Putin chooses to be even more aggressive. So I thought it was a very strong response.
Alex, thank you for your response. All right, I'm going to be moving on to the next question now. So remember, if you are not speaking, to please mute your microphones. I'm going to ask this question to Vanessa and Kim. So Vanessa, I will start with you. This is a topic that is affecting all of us in a big way, and that is, of course, inflation. The president spending a significant amount of his speech discussing that. So what do you think about Biden saying that he will lower costs and the deficit by creating more innovation and technology here in America?
Well, I thought that was an excellent statement, as was his speech, as was his speech overall. I mean, what else could you really say in his position? I mean, the inflation for, I'm going to say, the average everyday American, it's hitting people, really hard. But, thank God for the actions of the president and his administration prior to that with, the American Rescue Plan and the various, stimulus checks that everyone, that not everyone, but a lot of people receive. So I'm glad that he mentioned inflation. I'm glad that he's looking into it. I'm glad that he made a statement about lowering costs and not lowering wages. I thought that all tied in together. I do hope that, Congress will come together and pass these ideas that the president has, because we need to make sure that we are helping American people. And that's what I got from his statement regarding inflation, that he wants to help the American people, everyone. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Vanessa. And Kim, I will turn the same question over to you.
So I watched the entire thing line by line, and what I felt is that it was just a lot of platitudes, including on the topic of inflation. So Biden has given out trillions of dollars, which largely contributed to the inflation issue that we're dealing with right now. All I hear are these platitudes like lower the costs of everything, but increase the corporate taxes so that corporations can go overseas. Everything was a contradiction to what he said previously. It made absolutely no sense. Lower the cost of insulin to no more than $35 a month. But in his first week in office, he reversed Trump's insulin program. This cost skyrocketed for people who are taking insulin. But now, because he's going to get claps for it, here he is saying he's going to lower the cost of insulin. He's the one who raised the cost a year ago when he came in office. It's just a bunch of platitudes and complete baloney as to what he's saying. Nothing ties to actually what he's doing. Everyone getting up and clapping when he's lower the cost of goods, lower the cost of daycare, lower the cost of this. Who's going to pay for this? It's absolutely ridiculous. And I think American people are smart enough to see through this. He created the inflation.
Kim, thank you for your response. I'm going to address this next question now to Mark Anthony and Dawn. So Biden in his speech talked about crime prevention and community policing, making a big point to say not to defund the police, rather to fund the police with resources and training in an effort to also cut down on gun trafficking. So Mark Anthony, we will start with you.
Well, I'm glad to hear him now say not to say defund the police, when at the start, that's exactly what he used to say during his campaigns. But from my perspective, what he said is true. I guess he saw the light. It is time. It is true. We need to hold our police accountable. It is also true that we cannot defund the police, because it would create more chaos and it would not be good for civilization as we know it. As per guns, what he said about the gun perspective is exactly what we probably, not on the ghost guns, on the illegal guns flowing in cities. That's exactly what we as Republicans has pushed for so long. And the only thing we've received in back was we need to hold all guns accountable, not just the illegal guns held by gangs leaders. So if he means what he said, I completely agree, which I doubt completely that it was his mind.
Mark Anthony, thank you. And Dawn, the same question.
Well, thank you for the question. When we look at these issues, I think it's important for us to understand we're not that far apart, Republicans and Democrats, on the concept of keeping our communities safe, getting rid of guns in the hands of those who don't need to have them. I am myself a responsible gun owner, so I know the responsibility that comes with that. And to know that there are people on the street who are getting shot because of illegal guns does not sit well with me. It does not sit well with anyone who has people that they care about in their communities. So to be skeptical of a genuine attempt to bring resolution to this issue, I think is a shortness in foresight. When it comes to policing, again, we want the same things. We want safe communities. We just have to get to a place where we really understand what that looks like. I don't think that there's ever been a point when people were saying defund the police. I think what is being said is that there are better ways of utilizing monies besides arming police officers with different weapons to go into communities and police them. Let's get them the things that they need in order to treat situations that they come into with compassion, so that they understand the difference between someone who has a mental illness and someone who is actually a criminal. And so that people do not get shot for things that they really should not get shot for. So I think that it's important that we understand we want the same things. We want good education for our children. We want safe communities. We want to be able to live prosperous lives with good, bright futures. There's just a middle ground into getting those things accomplished.
Thank you, Dawn. And by default, Tremaine and Bobby, the final question is posed to both of you. So Biden brought up points of his Build Back Better plan. He didn't actually call it the Build Back Better plan by name, but he mentioned several items in what was formerly known as that. It stalled out in the Senate due to concerns of worsening inflation. Now, this would have federally subsidized childcare, and it also would have done things like create a $15 an hour minimum wage. That was, again, a big point of his discussion this evening. So what do you think about him urging Congress to act on some of these? Again, these are points that he's touched on before in the Build Back Better plan. He just didn't actually call that by name. And Bobby, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree mostly with what Kim said. Biden makes a lot of promises, and for a State of the Union, it's going to get a lot of applause, but just the logistics of how are we going to pay for this and how are we going to deal with all the debt. And he just talks about taxing the rich and closing loopholes, but that's just such little money compared to how much it actually costs to do all these things and everything he plans. So I think he's just all talk and no action. I don't think he's going to be able to follow through what he's trying to promise.
Thanks, Bobby. Tremaine?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Well, I had heard him say about making workers get paid $15 an hour, and also with the new infrastructure, he want to build more railroads and highways and stuff like that. So, well, we could see that if that could happen. I mean, who knows? But I just want to see an action to it because it's all promises. So let's see.
Great. I do see I have a chat here. Let me check that message here real quick.
My bad, I had sent that to you.
Alex, yes, why don't we go ahead? He sent a message regarding what President Biden said about lowering drug and insulin costs. He wanted to comment on that. And then I would welcome your comment. And then I would also welcome a counter comment to anything Alex says. And then we will make that the last question of the evening. All right, Alex?
Thank you so much, and I'll make it quick. But I just wanted to mention something about what I liked most about his speech when he did bring up lowering the costs of prescription drugs, when he did speak specifically about insulin for quite some time. And he had a child in the audience who had type 1 diabetes, and he spoke at length about the struggles that families go through when a member of the family does have type 1 diabetes, which I was actually diagnosed with a little over 2 years ago. And so although I'm lucky that I am able to pay for my insulin, I totally understand the reasons why it's so important to lower it, because it is an extremely unruly cost, especially when you look at how, like he said, these pharmaceutical companies can mark up the price by more than 300 times. And so I know, Kim, you were talking about how the Biden administration undid a Trump rule that would have lowered insulin costs. But I think the reason why the Biden administration undid the rule was because that same rule, which would have made the insulin cost what it costs at 340B prices for some consumers, would have also created new standards for eligibility that the Health and Human Services Department determined would increase costs of administration so much, because they would have to determine who is eligible and who isn't. So instead, the House already passed Biden's proposal to cap insulin costs at $35. And if the Senate were to do so, then that would also lower insulin costs, probably more than however much the Trump rule would have lowered them. And all that needs to happen is the Senate to approve it so that Biden can sign that into office. And then it would help people like me and people who are able to afford their insulin even less, be able to maintain that cost at a much more reasonable price than it currently costs in the United States. So I totally liked when Biden brought that up in his speech.
Thanks, Alex. Does anyone want to offer a different perspective or additional information on that topic? Kim, go ahead.
Yeah. So my husband has diabetes, and we buy diabetes medicine and needles and everything else. And when the Trump rule came down, his diabetes medicine was capped at a certain amount. After it was taken off in Biden's first week of presidency, his medication skyrocketed to $300 a month. This is with really good Florida health insurance. So I don't, Alex, I'm not sure, what kind of information but I'm a real person dealing with and paying for this medication as well. And
me too.
The medication legitimately went up by 6x. So if he wants to go ahead and lower it now, great. However we can get the cost of insulin and diabetic medicine lowered, that's wonderful. I'm all for it. But he's doing it after he already raised it. So it's kind of like you're just going back to something that had already been done. And I feel like he says these things and brings these people out just to gain claps, when the reality is, how many people, unless you actually are on these types of medications, how many people actually know that he undid that rule? My medication went up 6x. So that's real life.
Kim, thank you for your perspective as well. I will just ask before we go, is there any particular question that someone felt compelled to answer that they wanted to and did not get to? If so, I will take a couple of those responses, but if not, then I will go ahead and wrap it up here. If anyone had a burning desire to speak on any particular topic.
I wanted to talk more, because I do agree what he said about the border, about the crisis in the border. But on my perspective, from everything he's talked about, he found a solution for problems that he himself and his administration created. In the border, he created those problems. We said we need a secure border to get illegal immigrants out of it, and those coming legally to go in. He said, no, everybody come to our nation. Here we go. They all came at the same time. We had a problem at the border. That happened not just at the border, but most of his problem. Because what I saw was a theater for the midterm election. Because he talked about against Russia also, and yet we still buy oil from Russia. And yet he banned fracking when he said made in America. America first was all made America. He was against it during his election. And yet now he goes back to it. So my real question is, can we trust what he's saying? Can we actually say those promises that he's making for the next 2 years are actual promises, or is it just for politics?
Mark Anthony, thank you for posing that. And I will conclude by giving someone the opportunity, if they would like to offer perhaps counter thoughts or additional thoughts on that same topic of immigration.
I would just like to say that I believe that we are, as a nation, in a much better place with President Biden leading us. It's sad, and it's very unfortunate that we have become so divided that we can't seem to get on one accord on really important issues that affect our daily lives, and we seem to see what we want to see. I have been a voter for a long time. Yes, I am a Democrat. However, I'm not sheep. I don't just agree with everything that a particular party says. I have my own mind. But what I see and hear now is people seize upon something that's negative and just believe a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and we need to be a stable democracy. And it's been proven that we're not. I'm just going to say this in closing. I have lived a long time to see segregation, integration, I'm going to say immigration because we're talking about, the border. And America is a wonderful country. I've had friends, just different backgrounds, all my life, and I get this division that is really very uncomfortable. I get this concern. I was more concerned about voting rights. You didn't ask that question. The president kind of blew past it, if you ask me, but that is something that's crucial to everything that this democracy is about. And let me just rephrase that, because I see on social media where some people say we do have voting rights. So let's not use that term. Let's talk about voter suppression. So we're not talking about that enough. I think you in the mainstream media, you need to talk about that more often, because yes, there are voting rights, but that's not the issue. It's the voter suppression, and everything tied to that affects all of the issues that you've brought up, this evening. And we have to learn to make sure we have some sources that are objective when we, get our news. So I just want to, to close with that statement, because it's heavy on my heart based on what I'm, seeing and hearing. And I just expected that in 2022, we will be way past a lot of things that we are dealing with, that I dealt with or I witnessed, didn't completely understand, but that I witnessed as a child. And it is terribly, terribly sad. So I just want to end with that.
Vanessa, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And I know that there are several other topics that we could delve into that, unfortunately, due to the sake of time, we are not able to do so. But I appreciate all of your perspectives. I appreciate all of you taking time out of your evening to join in on this conversation. As many of you pointed out, we are not so different in the sense that we all want a better way of life for everyone in America. So